Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Inclusion Conversation series with the Inclusion Initiative. And thanks for being here. Thanks for taking time out of your Friday to join us. And Jonah, thanks so much for being with us. We're so excited to have you as our guest speaker. For everybody in the room, we are pleased to introduce you to my friend, Jonah Nigh. He's the Senior VP of Development and Alumni Engagement for the new school in New York City. He's also a public speaker, an amazing baker. You need to check out his Instagram and see all of his wonderful pictures. He's also a five-time marathoner and a transracial adoptee. And so he's joining us today to talk about his career experience, his experience as a transracial adoptee. So welcome, Jonah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And, thank you for doing this. I wish a resource like this had been around when I was growing up.
Thank you. Yeah, me too. Hence why
Yeah.
I'm building it now. Thank you. So, Jonah, there is so much to unpack about your life journey. You've had, I feel like you've lived 5 different lives within your lifetime. You've done so much and experienced so much. And it's been really awesome just to see everything that you've been able to achieve and accomplish. But as we all know, right, in this room, right, we've had a unique lived experience of being either a transracial adoptee or foster care alum. So our beginnings, right, were very different than what we might see today. So I'd love for you to share a little bit with us about your story. What would you like our audience to know about you?
Sure. Well, again, thanks. It's nice to meet you all, and I hope we can stay friends afterwards too, because I think we need each other. And I'll get to that later at the end about needing network and community. But I have a pretty typical story, I think, for late 70s. So I was born in 79, and I was born in San Francisco. And actually, Catholic Social Services proactively reached out to my parents. I say my mom's a Russian Jew and my dad's Texas. So that is their background. And my birth parents supposedly the story goes, my birth parents wanted me to be placed in a home with other Asian children. So Catholic Social Services had already placed 2 Korean children with my parents, and they were born in Seoul, not biologically related. So on Christmas Eve of 1979, they called my mom, who was making cookies, baking, and
Oh,
yeah, and said, "Do you want a baby?" And my mom's like, sure. So then I was delivered. Actually, so they called in December. I was delivered on Christmas Eve in a Christmas stocking with 2 candy canes, one for each of my siblings. So I've always been schmoozing. So my parents then eventually did have a biological child as well. So there were 4 of us. So 3 adoptees, all Asian, and then 1 biological child. So born in California, raised mainly in Minnesota, and at this point now I've lived in Virginia, Wisconsin, Massachusetts, and New York. I've been in New York for 17 years. I would say, and faith-wise, we were raised Messianic Jew on Saturdays and Evangelical Christian on Sundays. So just like angry God. Like I only know the front and the back of the Bible. Like I know like flush the world down the toilet God, or like send the dragon to eat the homosexuals God. Like I just know that. I don't know any of like the loving kindness stuff, which is still more than my husband, who's Catholic, and they don't read the Bible. But so then we moved mainly to Minnesota. What else? I would say the conversations about race and difference started around age 4 or 5. It's actually because in kindergarten, I was at recess, I was playing a board game with my friend Camille Erickson, and she looked at me and she goes, "Are you Black?" And I said, I didn't know. And so I said, I don't know. And so
wow.
for a day, I told people I was Black. And
Wow.
then I went home to fact check, and my mom was like, "You are not Black." So then she gave me the talk about, I mean, and it wasn't hidden at all. She just said it very simply, like, "You're adopted," and da 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 da. And it's like, well, how does that make me different than my older siblings? And she shouldn't have told me this because I already had an ego, but she said, well, you can be president and they cannot, because you were born here and they were born in Korea. And so I lorded that over, and then I told everybody. Now, this is interesting. My mom said, some people refer to Asians as skin as yellow. It's not yellow, but that you'll hear that. And so then I went to kindergarten and only got the last bit right. And so I told everyone, then I'm not black, I'm yellow. So then this
Oh
caused quite a
my.
stir amongst all the little kids in Minnesota. And then if you look at my drawings, like my children's drawings from that time period onward, they're all yellow. All the stick figures were yellow and stuff like that. So it's really funny, like, kids get understand difference. And I think there's a ton of social research about this, about how early the children discover it. But I didn't know what to call it. I didn't have the vocabulary. And thankfully, um, again, a product of my time, late 70s, early 80s. I know my parents were taught to say, I don't see color. We've obviously evolved since then, and they understand that if you can't see race, you can't see racism. But at the time, that was just like, oh, it doesn't matter. I'm just like everybody else. And then that started to permeate through life. Like, oh, I'm just like everybody else, too. I want to be like everybody else. And so the sort of, self-loathing and all that stuff started probably early on and manifested as I became an adult. Um, I think, and especially in terms of like dating and things like that,
Yeah,
wishing I was white, wishing I was straight, wishing I looked like the people around me, which was never going to be possible because I grew up in Minnesota.
right.
So everybody was like these huge Nordic people. I was like, I actually even, um, when I would buy clothes, I would buy them extra large because I'm just like, oh, I'll grow into them like everybody else, which obviously, again, that never happened. So I think one thing I'll say about the story of adoption, and which I'm glad that you're doing this to show the multiplicity of stories out there, is people are strange. I still find people are strangely fascinated. Like when you tell someone when I've told people that I'm adopted, I should say, they kind of stare at you like a crop circle for a second,
Hmm.
like, what is it like? And there's a storytelling competition called The Moth in New York City. It's connected to NPR sometimes. And I did it one night, and the theme was ethnicity. And so so if you don't know the construct, it's you put your name in a hat. If you're drawn, you get 5 minutes. You can't use a script, and you speak on the subject, and then the audience votes for the winner. And then you get little prizes, and then you get to go on NPR and stuff. I did it one night, and the theme was ethnicity. And three of the 10 of us told adoption stories. And mine was the only one that wasn't like bearing this huge trauma. I mean, the other two had
Yes.
struggled addiction and all these other things until they kind of came to a resolution about it. And I just got up and sort of told lighthearted stuff. So I thought that was interesting. So it really dawned on me at that point that most adoption stories that get foregrounded, are very traumatic.
Yeah, there's a lot of dominant narratives that kind of overtake, right, with the idea, with the image of what adoption is, what
Yeah,
foster care is, what it's supposed to be,
yeah,
right? So, yeah, it's so important that we share and are given the opportunity to share and be listened to, right, about what our authentic lived experience is. So, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I'm so glad that you did that. You were able to give, right, an authentic, different perspective of what it was like to be an adoptee.
yeah. I mean, I think my parents did a really good job normalizing it. I think they too probably got the trickle down effect of like, oh my God, your parents must be saints, right? Because they're white and they took in these
Hmm.
brown. And they've always rejected that. And whenever someone's like, oh my God, your parents must be so awesome, I'm like, they cause me awe often, but like they're just my parents. So, and I was very lucky to be adopted just like pretty much right after birth. So I didn't have a weird transition or any time a gap. Like my older brother and older sister, we're not sure how old they were when they were found, and then given to an orphanage in Korea, and then came over. They're guessing around 2, 3, or 4, but they don't really
Hmm.
know.
Yes, absolutely. That definitely is the experience of a lot of, especially Korean
Yeah.
adoptees that I've heard.
Mhm.
So I'd love to explore a little bit with you what you were talking about, right? About knowing you were different, you didn't have language for it, but you knew you didn't want to look different or be different, right? You wanted to belong. You wanted to be like everybody else. Such a normal, right, desire
Yeah.
for anyone, no matter if you're adopted or not. You want to belong, you want to be like everyone else. You want to be accepted. Um, but people, right, that are within communities, within homes, within environments that do reflect them, right? And they know that they're from that community or from that heritage, right? They're able to have more language and context about who they are. Whereas, for me personally, as a transracial adoptee, I didn't have any language or context about that. And you shared that you had a similar experience. So, how did you start to form, right, your understanding of that language? How did you start learning that language and those concepts to where you could internalize it for your own understanding, but then start communicating it?
Probably, I mean, my friends actually really told me that I had internalized racism because I didn't date a brown person until like of any color until my late 20s. And they were like, oh, this is some internalized racism. And I was like, no, I guess it's pretty external if like this is informing. And so I think it took me moving to New York probably to start to feel New York is the first place, it's the only place I've ever lived where felt like I could let my shoulders down. And then I started to sort of examine, like, well, why was that? What was happening in Boston or San Francisco or DC or other places that I've lived that was preventing me from that? So I think moving here and then just um, sort of living in this really big world that is the city. But, what I would say is like, the short version is it took me way too many years, I think, on this planet to understand how lucky I am to inhabit a big world. I have
Mm,
so many more stories. I'm like so much more interesting than a lot of the people I meet just because I've had all these really strange experiences and friction. And in terms of language, I actually, if you don't mind, I brought a couple quotes that I've been
yeah.
thinking about in terms of thinking about this conversation. And one of them is because I just I co-presented with Dr. Renee White, who's a sociologist here at the New School and our provost, and Melissa Manquist, who's a development person as well at NYU. Now, this is specifically about the Black experience. This is by W.E.B. Du Bois. But I love this in terms of, I wish I could have had language like this, and it's sad that this is over 100 years ago because it's, I think, applicable for a lot of brown folks. But the quote is, it's a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. And then he has another quote that's, it dawned upon me with a certain suddenness that I was different from the others, or like mayhap in heart and life and longing, but shut out from the world by a vast veil. And then the great philosopher Tina Fey on Las Culturistas podcast, authenticity is dangerous and expensive. So
Oh,
those,
wow.
yeah, so those three, because right, authenticity will cost you jobs and money and
Yeah.
opportunities if you speak your truth. So those are ways that I think that's beautiful language around the idea of two-ness, of double consciousness, and then you add in the intersectionalness to it, intersectionality of it all for me, being gay as well. So you have all these things going on.
Yeah. That's really powerful language. That's
Yeah,
profound.
yeah.
And it's
Double,
profound that something that was written 100 years ago it still resonates so deeply today.
yeah, yeah.
So tell me a little bit about transitioning us a little bit. Tell me a little bit about just kind of your, I guess, experience, right, coming into young adulthood. So transitioning from being a teenager, right, within your community, your home, and just, you're transitioning then into adult life, into going to school, into exploring your opportunities, like you said, like this bigger world that you get to be a part of,
Mhm.
and your realization, right, that you had that you just could explore and figure out who you were in this bigger context. So would love to hear a little bit about your journey.
Well, the places where I went to undergrad was Lawrence University in Wisconsin, and grad school was New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. So it's like, again, two predominantly white and really homogeneous communities. So I had such a skewed knowledge of even what, being Asian was. Like all my Asian friends growing up had, adopted names. So like Gretchen or Naomi or Ari,
Or
Jonah.
Grace.
Grace, so that's kind of I thought that was what an Asian name was. So
Yeah.
it actually and I looked at back at in preparation for this like journals from that time period, and some of the words that kind of stuck out to me were or phrases were like feeling suffocated, wishing to be different, and this is still into through college too. So even going to grad school, I still was like, not feeling certainly desirable. There's an added complexity, of course, in gay culture where Asian men rank the lowest in terms of
Mm,
societal values. I think in general, Asian men too, right? We aren't seen as the leads and things and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of data that's been collected from dating apps. And I think it's like Black women and Asian men are like the least likely to be swiped, regardless of whether it's a straight or gay or bi app. So I think that informed a lot of it. So I just sort of deflected a lot with humor. And I was very lucky never to be bullied and I often question like why wasn't I bullied, but some of my other friends were. And I think it was because they were white in terms of sexuality, at least.
mm,
They were white, therefore they were very visible. And then there's an invisibility to Asians. We're like, oh, he's just funny. He has no sexual anything. So I was so always surprised, like, how am I flying under the radar?
yeah.
Because I'm hanging out with a bunch of people who are getting bullied for this, that, or the other thing, but I'm not getting bullied. And I think it's because of the invisibility of Asianness in American culture, you know. So yeah, exactly. At least it's the intersectional piece, and I think that helped me. Um, and I was good at disarming people, you know. So that's I think how I came into young adulthood. I don't really feel like I spoke with the voice I have now until a few years into New York. And I even remember like dating somebody the first time who was Asian, like from an Asian country, spoke Asian languages, and it felt so foreign to me, you know.
Yeah, the knowledge of white code helps us blend in, Shalice says. Yeah. Yeah, that's very poignant. So tell us a little bit about where you first started, I guess, in your pursuit towards adulthood and finding out what you wanted to be and who you
Mm,
were. I know that where you started is very different than where you are now, so it'd be really interesting to hear how that
yeah.
progressed.
I mean, I was very practical. I was a workaholic. We grew up with, financial adversity and whatnot at home. So it's just work, work, work. And I actually was an opera singer from age 17 to 26. So even in undergrad and grad school, though, I was singing and that was my life goal. And then I had a surgery in my voice when I was 26, which was going to prevent me from doing that. And I think any artistic pursuit, it is very difficult to disentangle and disarticulate who you are from what you do, like because they're the
Hmm.
same, right? Your hobby is the thing you do for money, your livelihood. That especially voice too. It's literally you.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's my sister and I debated this because she was a violinist, but I'm like, yeah, but you could externalize that part. I never could. If somebody didn't like my voice, they could have just said they don't like me. They may as well have just said they don't like me. So that's, I think around that age is when I was like, I have to, one, it's freeing actually for what you do and who you are to be separate, as they should be. But it took that kind of monstrous event in my life to take place before I could get that and fully understand that. And then it was just about practicality. So my goal was like, I needed to support myself. I needed to pay off my student loans. Um, so I was a booking agent for a little while. I trained to be a sommelier for a while. Those weren't my people. And then I got a job in New York writing grants for a while. I hated that. I thought that was what fundraising was. I was like, this is like doing my taxes over and over and over again, but it paid really well. So I'm like, I guess I have to do this for a while. And then 07, 08 hit, and they're like, you have to do the annual fund now. And it's like, wait, I can just talk to people and get their money? I can do that. So then I started that trajectory, and I've been in fundraising now for 18 years. And you know, so it's worked out well for me. So I, went to Lincoln Center and Columbia and a lot of fancy places, and now I'm at the new school. So that's been the career trajectory. But it was once it wasn't about me and making art and being an opera singer. Then it was about I had to make money. I had to survive.
Yeah. And I want to kind of explore that transition a little bit.
Hmm.
Did you find challenges um, transitioning from what you thought you were going to be and what you were really skilled and talented in to all of a sudden pivoting, right, to something else that you had never done before? And how did your intersectionality, do you think, impacted that transition for you?
Oh, it was difficult because one thing that I felt safe about in opera world is you're a character. Also, it's like suspension of disbelief, right? There's nothing more extreme and weird than opera, right? You got a bunch of people running around singing in a language they don't speak, rolling around, dying of tuberculosis. It's always like tuberculosis or like some old-timey disease for the soprano, at least. What I found about what I loved about opera is like my race didn't matter because I still had consumption, TB. It's like it's never like, cancer. It's never like modern disease. It's always like, something really dramatic where you cough blood into a handkerchief. Um, but yeah, so that was difficult because I got to hide a little bit, and I liked that about opera because they take place in fantastical worlds. Being Asian in the Magic Flute, it doesn't matter what race you are in the Magic Flute as long as you can sing it. Um, I think increasingly it's become a problem, but so I'm glad I'm not doing that. But yeah, but I think it's interesting. When I was at Columbia working, the dean at the time, the late Peter On, had said for the School of General Studies, which was for people getting their bachelor's who are non-traditional students, they had a lot of ex-army and ex-art ballerinas. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, there's nothing more frightening than the work ethic of like a former ballerina or army person. And I think it's true for a musician. Like, so I was like, yeah, I don't know how to do this, but I'm gonna practice. I'm gonna drill, work. So I think the work ethic that being a professional musician instills is really, it's probably not the healthiest because there's no boundaries, and you're like always practicing, and you're always taught that you're not good enough. But it's a work ethic that is aimed towards mastery. And so when I have a coach now, I have an executive coach now and people are like, why? You have the top seat. I was like, yeah, but you're always supposed to be tuning and you always need another set of ears and eyes, kind of tweaking the work that you do and someone who can um, tell you that, to be the counterbalance. And I picked a coach specifically who was Asian, but also I picked somebody who was like a calming presence and maybe not like as caffeinated as I am. Like I'm not getting caffeine today. This is how my baseline. So like I don't need it. And so I wanted somebody to balance. So yeah, and my vocal coaches were the same too, very calming, that kind of thing. Adoptee work ethic too. Well, that's interesting because my older brother and older sister were academic whizzes without trying and I had to try very hard. And my parents couldn't understand the pressure. They're like, "We got C's in high school. Where is this coming from?" My sister got like 1400 or something on the first attempt on the SAT. This is back when I was 1600 or 1350 or something. She locked herself in her room and cried. And
Wow.
my parents were like, "Where is this coming from? Like, we don't understand it." And we didn't understand it. We're like, "Well, it's because we're Asian." It must be because we're genetically predisposed to just be high achievers. And I felt bad because like I hit a wall. Math started becoming hard for me in 11th grade instead of 12th grade. But these they got in somehow. So it was either adoption, trying to be worthy, or or Asian, trying to keep up with your Asian peers, or I don't know, it could be, it's a mix probably of it all.
Yeah, the complexity of internalized stereotypes and wanting to perform. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, Felice.
Yeah.
So that is you've had like, yes, an incredible, interesting, right, kind of pivot of experience, of discovery, of really leaning into different parts of yourself. And I'd love to hear more about, when you finally reached the top seat. So you talked a little bit about, right, you're the head of the fundraising for the new school, really amazing, awesome, right? Opportunity there. And it took a long time, right, for you to be able to achieve the success at that level. And you put in a lot of blood, sweat, tears. You put in just a lot of yourself, right, into understanding who you are authentically, who you
Mm.
want to be, and what work is important to you. So, what you're doing every day is, you are helping people obtain opportunities. And I know you're super passionate about, communities that have less opportunity getting that opportunity at the new school. Like, I know you're a big voice there. And so, looking and reflecting back, what are some of, I guess, in hindsight, what are some of the, um, oh, I'm sorry, I'm letting someone in here. What are some of the reflections that you now see looking back about your journey? And I guess what you would tell your younger self?
I think I had to get my head on straight about using my positionality and voice to take on certain issues that are in our field, which is it's very homogeneous. It's predominantly white. There's an imbalance, obviously, of wealth and power. And I was very resentful of doing the panels. The panels. So like in May, I had to be Asian, June, I had to be gay, in the fall, I had to be
Mm,
Jewish. And I was like, oh God, is this what being senior vice president is now? And our former head of equity, inclusion, social justice, Melanie Hart, was like, what are you proving by saying no? Are the places that are asking you to do this consistent with your values? And if they are, then get up there and say, I know very well why I'm here. And so that really helped turn me around to just feeling like kind of like an extra from a reality show that where they just like plop you in into certain panels. And I think what I would say is one thing I wish I had learned was a different kind of way of thinking about diversity and equity. And again, I learned this from Melanie, but the way I think of it now is really that just diverse in all the word soup and alphabet soup of that kind of work. I think the clearest way I can think of it is diversity as a fact, equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, and belonging is a result. And that really helped me narrow in on like, okay, what is the kind of work then that has to be done? Because there's so much public programming around belonging because that's a word that makes people feel good. But when you think of it as like, no, belonging is the result, that you don't get to claim that until you've done the equity and inclusion work, until you've made very difficult choices around your budget, around who you put into power and who you hire, who you
mhm.
put down to. And then, so those are the choices. And then the inclusion is like, did you actually do the choices that you made? So you don't even need to talk about diversity because at least in a place like New York City, and I'm speaking about, New York, this is certainly not the way it was in Minnesota or something, but diversity is just a fact. So let's move on. Let's move on to the next topic. Let's make some very intentional choices. Um, Fundraising is, I last looked statistically, it's like 89% white workforce. Um, and our frontliners, our force of frontliners is over 60% BIPOC. That's not an accident.
Wow.
It was intentional and they happen to be qualified. How about that?
Can you explain what you mean by frontliners?
So the people who go out to solicit donors. So there's operations people, there's a lot of back of the house work, which is equally important and never gets, there are unsung heroes in my field. But the people who you think of when you think of frontline fundraisers are probably like me, the ones actually going out. And the note, I think the thinking has been like, well, they better look like the donors. And who are the donors? Who has the wealth in this country? White men, right? So when you have a workforce then that is 60% BIPOC, then the conversations, then the self-care, the survival techniques and all that stuff has to change a little bit. But that's where I kind of think about the panels now. It's like, I want to focus on choices and actions. And the other two words, that's fine, whatever. But if they make you feel better.
Yeah,
But
I love that.
this is an assertive stance. It rubs people the wrong way. And we've all have to find our ways. I have an advantage being a man. I'm listened to more. If I'm assertive, it's, ooh, he has something to say, but then I get dinged for being gay. So like there's just it's there's we all have our scoreboard of misery Olympics, and we can it all gets like rejiggered depending on whichever environment we're in. But I realize I do have a lot of advantages.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And it's really important, right, for us to each individually understand the privilege that we bring to the table and how we are leveraging that, right, for those around us who don't carry the
Mhm.
same privilege. So really appreciate you sharing that and saying that. And what I also wanted to talk about during our time together was one of the first times I learned about you was on the show Baking It
Mhm.
with Maya Rudolph. And the first baker I've ever seen on TV that shared an adoption experience.
Yeah, it
And I
was
was like,
important.
"Whoa, this is very cool." I'm also a very huge, baking fanatic as a hobby. I'm not as skilled as you are,
Don't
but
believe everything
it
you see on TV. It's reality TV, but lot of a lot of stuff happens in the studio.
Yes, I'm sure. But what I wanted to highlight, right, was all of a sudden on I think at the time was it NBC? It's on Peacock now, but
Yeah,
on this huge broadcast network, there was all of a sudden a story about adoption told from the lived experience perspective
yeah,
that it wasn't like the extreme, right? It wasn't this extreme sob story, and
right.
it wasn't this extreme like, oh, I'm now CEO of Apple. I'm just making that up. But we don't often hear just like normal stories of resilience, of good experiences, of challenges, of just this journey of being
Yeah.
as adoptees or foster care alum. And it just stuck with me, it resonated with me. I watched that whole season just, like, glued to your
Thank you.
story.
Thank you. You
And
and my
then you
mom.
were
My
and then
mom.
you were on the the John Chi show too, and I was
Yeah.
just like, "Yeah, this person, I have to meet them," which is when you and I connected. And I want to just, like, hear a little bit from you what that was like to be sharing your story on a platform like that, and what you had really hoped to bring to our community through just sharing your perspective and your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to downplay the importance of it. I also just love reality TV. So like I knew during the casting process, like, look, no one tastes it at home, right? So there had better be a story. And then also, Amy Poehler produced it, and she's like the warmest heart. She makes Park and Rec, and she did the
Big
sister
fan. Yep.
sister show Making It, which is about stories and creating and crafting, and it's not cutthroat. And so all the challenges, if you haven't seen it, like for example, that one of the challenges was a three-tiered cake, the Dickens challenge, holiday Dickens challenge. So each layer had to represent a holiday, past, present, and future. So like a very stories based approach to it, not as technical as like Great British Bake Off or something like that, and then very silly because it's all the producers of SNL, so it's skits and singing and dancing and stuff. Um, so I knew that the story piece was going to be important. I wanted to do that anyway. I also knew it would make me stand out. And during the casting, a lot of the directors, some of it was showing them I could make a pie in 2 hours, but then some of it they just wanted to see what I had to say. And I remember one of the casting directors, and I don't think, not mean intention, but they're like, "Do you make any ethnic food?" And I played dumb and I just said, "Well, I think all food's ethnic. What are you what are you asking?" And they're like, well, like, do you do any Asian foods?" And I said, "I can make them, but that's not the basis of like what I bake because that's not how so I told them, I said, if you want that, do not cast me. That is what you, if like I can put matcha in something like once, it's fine. But like that's it. I said you're gonna get a lot of Jewish deli food. You're gonna get like homemade like Midwesterny type stuff. For me, you will not get, like an ethnic Asian dish, whatever that is. So that was important for me, for them to for me to tell them and for them to understand that like what you're getting is this. And actually, this is really funny. So when there were 18 teams left and they told us 8 of you are going to come to LA, they put us all in a big Zoom and we all had the same challenge. And there was one other gay couple, and I'm like, oh, I was like, they're not going to cast us both, right? You need one of every flavor on a reality TV show. And they were like these like really good looking blonde guys from LA, like tank tops and shorts and this like palatial kitchen. And like my husband and I live in the Bronx. And like our kitchen, it was like they needed to see the whole kitchen. They needed to see you actually cooking. And I was like, there's only one
Okay.
angle that would work for our kitchen. It's like CCTV. Like we had to put a laptop on the top of the refrigerator and point it down. It was the worst angle. I was like, well, I guess we're gonna have to be the ones with heart and be funny. So then you had to present to the producers, and I could see the power of the story. It's like this is
Yeah.
the challenge was make a choux pastry that represents you as a couple. So it's like, okay, so it's apples and honey for Rosh Hashanah, and I dyed it red and green. I hung it from a Christmas tree, and that was more important to them than just having the muscle guys.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And how has I guess, how has your own like personal life changed since being so public about your story and letting the world know about your story?
Oh, I mean, I don't think it has. I think it's come through more like public speaking. There was a period of time right after the show where people were pinging me about it, and I've gotten to do some really fun things because of it. So I don't want to be a public figure, but I like doing things publicly, if that makes sense. Like I like, sharing the stories and stuff like that. But the point of the show was never to be famous or to be my husband will never do another reality TV show. He's already told me. He had a good time. He had a wonderful time. That was his one time.
Yeah.
um, so I think though, I don't know. I've gotten some nice notes though every now and then from people just being like, "Oh, I don't know any. I didn't. I was worried about my son because of this, this, and this," or like a mom from the Midwest or something like that. So that's been gratifying. Um, but yeah, I
So
mean, I don't.
you've sorry, Jonah. So you feel like you've um really integrated the storytelling of your experience kind of throughout your journey.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we didn't know Maya Rudolph was going to be that was a true surprise when you watch the show, when you see us react to the hosts and stuff.
Yeah.
But I didn't, I mean, I knew all about her because I'm obsessed with her. So I knew that she had come from a dual faith, dual race family. And so when she and I talked about that, I felt very safe telling her with 50 cameras about my story because I knew she would get it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's great. That's great. It shows the importance, right, of sharing authentic experiences and
Yeah, and she
making
wasn't shy
people
about
feel,
sharing. Yeah, she talked about her grandma Miriam and like the noodle kugel they would make during Hanukkah and stuff like that. So,
yeah, that's beautiful. So let's pivot a little bit. I want to keep talking about baking, but
yeah.
let's pivot a little bit into just that you've experienced multiple industries, roles, levels of, powers of, or positions of power, or positions that don't have much power, right, within organizations. Now that you can reflect on that and look back and just kind of see the state, past and current, of what work and opportunity looks like for folks who have our lived experience, and
Mhm.
really, in in my perspective, there's still such a huge gap of representation, of even knowledge,
Yeah.
that our communities exist around everybody in at work and in our professional sectors. And for me, part of building actually one of the key pieces of building the inclusion initiative was that piece, which is such a large piece of my identity and my lived experience. It was not recognized, it was not welcome, it was dismissed as a part of this conversation around inclusion, belonging, uh, being, a supportive workplace and environment, right, for folks that had all of these different lived experiences. And I found that not only could I not really belong with the Asian communities, the very few Asians that I would be able to work or be in space with at work. And of course, I grew up in a white environment, so felt comfortable, right, in that environment, but I didn't actually belong in that environment. And just the piece of where do I belong? Who are my people? Where's my community at work where I can share, right, the experiences that I've had and find some support, whether it's navigating challenges unique to our identities, whether it's finding a mentor, somebody that can understand some of my lived experience. You can help me, right? Help me obtain goals or reach goals or obtain opportunities that I really want for myself, but can help me because they understand how I navigate this world and kind of, they understand some of the things I've been through, and just have a lens to that. It's so important, right? When we have mentors that they have some of that empathy, right? And you can share that authentic relationship together. And so when you're looking back and when you're looking at the current state of our workplaces and our workforce and what's available to us as resources and who's being supported and the gaps, what we're doing well, what we need to be doing better, um, what do you think is really missing for people with lived experiences as adoptees and foster care alum? What do you think is being done really well? And what do you hope, right, that we start putting into place for the workforce so that our communities can be better represented and supported?
Well, in general, I think if there's a resource missing, I've always been of the mindset I'm going to create it then. Just a couple examples. So when COVID hit, I was the head of development at the Jewish Museum, and obviously everyone was scrambling. So I just cold called all the other versions of me around the city at the Met and Guggenheim or whatever and said, do you want to make a playbook on how we're going to get through this? Because we're not going to have any visitors. And everybody said yes. And so we created this consortium and they still meet now, like once a month. For my field, which again is 89% white, I saw that BIPOC fundraisers were having to do some extra work just to code switch into the world that we were getting our money from. So I just created a forum for that. And now we have, a space for that and we meet regularly. So it's not fair that we have to create these resources, but in general, I'm like, all right, well, we'll just make it ourselves. Coleman Domingo, the actor, in Ruston and stuff, he did a good talk here and he talked about how artists just need to create. And I think, and you are creative when you have restrictions, like you create something and do it in a basement bar if it's empty, if you have to. And so I think taking an sort of an artistic, practical, scrappy, creative mindset to that area. Because now, I mean, what I do like about TikTok and Instagram is like you're just a hashtag away of finding community really fast if you set up the forum, and it takes like 10 minutes to create the forum. I think institutions are too slow to change. I think it's a lot of lip service. I think it's a lot of self-righteousness wrapped up in inaction. So I tend to try to just do the practical thing and make it myself if I can. And it's important then, and to that end though, for yourself, for your own sanity, have one text message group. That's it, not a bunch, not all my in-laws on one. I have to turn that on silent during the workday because it's like we have jobs. But there is a group that I call it, the text message group is called Women Talking. I don't identify as a woman, but I just thought that was a funny title for it because the rest of them are women. where it's like, well, you can gut check during the day. There's a lot of race lighting, so akin to gaslighting. It's like if we experience some sort of racism and then someone says, no, you're just being sensitive, or no, that's not what they meant. That's race lighting in sociology
Mm.
terms. And so it's nice to have that emergency button to be like, this person just said this to me. That's crazy, right? And then like, yes, absolutely. Here's what to do. So I think everybody needs a text group for some support, whatever you're needing in that space. And work is generally one of those spaces. Um, my husband's a bioethicist. He's on the floor. I can't text him because he doesn't have his phone with him. Nor would like he enjoy that if I was just like, can you believe what so and so said to me? But yeah, so I mean, that's just really practical advice I try to give people in the year. Just have that one text group that you can gut check, keep yourself sane, all that kind of stuff. And then again, and if a resource is not readily available for the needs that you have, make it because you're not the only one who needs it. And it feels really good to help other people. So yeah, it's draining, but it's like listened to some podcasts recently about how people vacation. There's the two types of people. There's like the people who just want to rest, and then there's like the people who want to do stuff. And they've done studies to show they're both equally they're both restorative. So just kind of for me, making the space and the thing is restorative for me too. So it's not like a hardship for me to host these other forums.
Yeah, and you're empowering not only yourself, but
Yeah.
an entire community of people that need
Yeah.
what you're building or
Yeah.
what you're creating or what you're making. Yeah. Yeah, I do love that. Thank you. That's a great perspective, Jonah. Thank you so much. And so I guess my final question I'll ask before we jump into Q&A. Now that we have, oh gosh, I'm gonna say this wrong. Is Generation Alpha? We got Generation Alpha, just starting to be born and rise into, childhood. We've got the Gen Zs now well into the workforce. They're a couple years in now into the workforce. And we think about, right, all of these folks in the community that do share, right, our lived experience
Mhm.
as adoptees or foster care alum. What is your hope for their work experience, for their career trajectory experiences, for their professional experiences when, in the next 10, 15 years?
I think I mean, I'm kind of amazed by the people that I work with who are younger than me. Honestly, I'm not just saying this because I think some of them are going to watch this and I want to retain their talent. No, but honestly, my assistant, I think she just turned 30, but I've been working with her for 4 years. When I first started working with her, I was like, what do you want? Do you want a mentor? Like, you ask the punch list of questions. She's like, I don't subscribe to hustle culture. This is a job. Like, she knew her boundaries at 26. She knew what she was about at 26. So I think really good piece of advice I got once, listen like you're wrong. So I try when I engage with that generation, I try to listen because they can tell us old heads a thing or two. And I fully recognize that the way I drove myself into the ground in my early jobs was not healthy.
Yep.
It was successful in like a capitalist way, but it was not like healthy for my mental health or something.
Yep.
But what I hope for them is that, especially with hybrid work too, is that there's a real distinction between work and life, that their relationship, that's actually a question I asked everyone I interview, regardless of what generation I think that they might be. One of the
Wow.
first 6 questions is how have you re-examined your relationship to work in the last 4 years? And I'm very curious if someone has not done that introspection, I don't think it's going to be a great fit because I'm like, you missed the point. That was I hope the existential event of our lifetimes. And if you didn't take that moment to reassess how you were in different places and spaces, I'm not sure that's the kind of thinker I want on my team. So I do want someone and I also want them to feel that I think bringing your whole self to work is a cliche at this point, the way people say that. Um, because it's still a job, not to be all Mad Men about it. That scene when he's like, that's what the money's for. Like, I don't, this is like, there's a balance, like, I don't want it to be a place where it feels like your living room. Like, we're paid to be here. We're paid to be here every day. We have to do a thing. But I do hope that there is more space for people, and I certainly try to create that for the team that I manage. I think I've been successful at it. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, no, I love that. And I just love your whole takeaway message of empower yourself, empower others, like creating change in the small ways that you can, that you want to see, right? In the environments that you're in,
my
that you're,
first year, yeah, had a great saying. When I was like pulling my hair out about something, it's probably like HR related. It always seems to be HR related. But he was like, I need you to stop asking for agency, and I need you to start exercising the agency you already have. There is a culture of learned helplessness in certain communities, and I that it took about 6 months for that phrase to come back and hit me again. It's like learned helplessness. That's what minorities have been taught, right?
mm,
That's what any marginalized group has been taught. We don't have resources, we don't have this, we don't have that. But wait a minute, we already have agency, we already have some power. Oh, we can do it ourselves. And like what a freeing thing, right? And I don't consider myself a helpless person, but learned helplessness, we have that has been beaten into us, that we're always auditioning for our whatever we've accomplished, right? We didn't really earn it or this or that or whatever. So I try to keep that in mind, and I tell that to my team all the time. It's like exercise the agency you all have. Everyone has power, even my junior staff that's white. I'm like, you have some power that I'll never have, so use it, you know.
yes, we all have agency. We all have power. I love
Yeah.
that. So I think what we'll do is go into Q&A. And for everyone watching and participating, we're going to stop the recording at this point, and we're going to say goodbye to the general audience, and those of you that want to stick around for the Q&A, please do. But Jonah, before we sign off here, just really want to thank you for being here. Thank you for just the work that you do at the new school and the communities in your comedy. I love it, love it. And if people want to follow you,
Oh
I
yes.
know that you're on Instagram, you're on TikTok, you're on X, you're on Facebook, you're on LinkedIn. And so they can follow you right on IG at Nigh Jonah.
Yep.
Facebook, you're Jonah Nigh.
Yep.
LinkedIn, they can find you at Jonah Nigh. And so, for all of you listening in, we really hope that you found just some hope, empowerment. You are going to now go home, right, and set some boundaries for yourself too. I think that's a really important takeaway Jonah shared. And just follow Jonah, follow his work. There's some amazing things that he's done, that he will do, and he's an inspiration to all of us. So, thanks, Jonah, for being here. We really
Thank you.
appreciate you.
And thank you again for creating the thing that wasn't created. You just did it, and now it's growing and thriving. So this is great. And yeah, if I can ever be helpful, this is so sad, but like that I have the most activity on TikTok or LinkedIn. Like how sad. That's like how strange is that? But if you ever want to connect with me on either of those, happy to. And as one of my favorite donors would say, call anytime on any matter. And I mean it.
Oh, that's
Yep.
wonderful. Thank you. We will. We will. Thanks, everybody.